Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to Dark Abyss Miniatures. Today I'm going to show you 3 tips on how to improve your painted miniatures. This first one is pick out your highlights and go brighter with those highlights. So for this guy, his chitin had highlights on the edges where I dry brushed it before applying the contrast colour, but they just weren't showing up very well from a couple of feet away. Up close it looks fine, but from a couple of feet away you really couldn't see very much. So I mixed in some pale yellow, which is basically the equivalent of an ice yellow or a dawn yellow if you're using Citadel, and went along and picked out all the edges of that chitin to really give it some punch. I'd really recommend that you don't use a white mixed in with your base colour to highlight with, because white desaturates the colour. You want that highlight to have some punch, so I really recommend an ice yellow or a bright flesh colour or something with some warmth to it. So something that's got some yellow in it will really help keep the vibrancy going with the paint. When I mixed this up, it actually looked like a very bright green, which looked a bit weird, but the moment you put it on the model it looked absolutely fine. And at the end, when you see the picture of the improved version of this gun, you'll see the difference that really made to this miniature. And you can do it with a variety of colours. You can mix an ice yellow into any colour to give it a bit more punch and vibrancy, rather than adding a white. It just doesn't have the same effect as adding ice yellow, or a really bright skin colour, for instance, that's got a lot of yellow in it, will really help. So my next tip is quite obvious, and it's fix your mistakes. Now, you might be rolling your eyes thinking, I know that one, duh, but when you're painting a bunch of miniatures at once, or you're painting a whole army like I was when I painted these Tyranids, you'll make mistakes. And when you're using contrast a lot, you get coffee staining, or if you're using normal paints, you might get a bit of patchiness where you've rushed the job, or you've got a bit of black on where you've got some red and whatever. So go around and really look out for those little mistakes you've made and just touch them up and get them looking really nice. Okay, tip number 3, another kind of obvious one, but that is use different colours for your recess shading. So on this gun, the claws, the hooves, the teeth, I painted metal, and I could have just gone over that with a black wash, but I wanted to give them a bit more interest, so I used a purple wash to shade them with, and it had the same effect. But also things like some of the joints on the limbs don't really need much to make them look a lot better, so just going over them with a purple wash makes a world of difference and only takes a couple of seconds. Okay, right, that was 3 tips. I've got 2 more for you. Okay, my next tip, and that is pay extra attention to where you want the focal point of the miniature to be. For this gun, it's the face. Not all of them have their tongue sticking out, but what they all have is eyes, and those eyes look evil as. So I went in with a pale yellow, which is ice yellow again, mixed with a tiny bit of the fluorescent pink that I'd used initially on the eyes to really make them eyes stand out. And doing something really small like that can make a massive difference. And my last tip is pay a bit more attention to your bases. These bases look really boring with just some brown contrast paint thrown on. So I used a brown and green enamel wash and just put it here and there on the miniature, on the base, but also put it on the hooves and the lower limbs of the model to help tie it into the base. You don't want a nice clean model stood on a dirty or battle worn base. You want to tie it into the environment to make it look more realistic and give it more visual interest. So I applied some on the lower limbs of that gaunt as well. So there you have it. There's my 5 tips to improve your miniatures for your army. They're all quite straightforward. Anyone can implement them in their army. It doesn't matter whether you're brand new to miniature painting or whether you've been painting 20 years. The one thing I always forget is to go brighter with my highlights. That's something that I really have to actively think about, is that looks bright enough, I need to go brighter. And I just don't do it when I'm painting an army. I do it if I am going for a display level model, but you want to apply that for your army as well. You really do, because when you're painting for your army, most of the time you're looking at it from a couple of feet away or top down on a table, or you've got people walking past and they're having a quick look. You want to grab your attention and other people's attention by going brighter with those highlights. And it applies the same when you paint display level painting and people bring the model up close, because you want to grab them initially when they're walking past a line of miniatures that they're judging. They don't have long to look at each model, so when they're going along, they're looking for what grabs their attention. And the only way you can do that is if you go brighter with those highlights. And I would say categorically do not use white in your highlights. Use a pale ice yellow, dawn yellow, those sorts of colors. Bright Kislev flesh, for instance, Citadel, a really bright, vibrant flesh color. I've got quite a bright one here called Warm Flesh by Pro Acryl. It's quite yellowy in nature. That's a good one to use as well. Things like that. Also, with your shading, don't just go with black or brown or a flesh colour for flesh. If you're painting a female, when you're drawing focal, you want the focus on the face. You might not be comfortable with painting the eyes. That's fine. But you can make the face look much more interesting by mixing in a bit more red with your flesh wash and putting that on the cheeks if it's a female, and going really bright yellow with the highlights on the top of the cheekbones and on the forehead. If you're painting a male face, then mixing a tiny bit of blue with your flesh shade will turn it into a bit of a grey. And if you thin that down and just glaze or just put it in the recesses of the lower face, you can give him a 5 o'clock shadow and make him look more masculine. Things like that. Yeah, use more colors. And with bases, it's simple. Highlight rocks, paint the rocks a different color. My bases were quite boring brown, so just mixing in a green and brown gives it a bit more life to it. And tie your miniature in with it. I don't mean coat all the lower legs of your miniatures. They're not all going to be caked in dirt and everything, but put in a little bit on the bottom of the boots or shoes or whatever, or even whatever wash you've used on the base, use that as a recess shade on the lower parts of on the lower limbs of the model on the base, for instance, something like that. Or use the whatever color you've used, use it in a mix of one of the colors on like the feet. If you've highlighting brown leather boots, for instance, and he's on like on a grey base, use a bit of that grey in your brown to highlight the boots with, or something like that. That can really help tie the model in, and it just makes it look more believable. Yeah. If you've got any tips of your own, drop them in. If you've got any questions about any of my tips today, then please ask away. I'll answer all comments on my channel. And lastly, to everyone who subscribed this last week since I released my Death Company video, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm a tiny channel, but I've got aspirations to grow this, and I can't grow it without people subscribing and watching my videos. So massive thank you to you all. And if you haven't already, then please subscribe to my channel. Everyone, no matter whether you're a beginner or an expert, can get something from this video. I really think you can, especially the go brighter than you think with your highlights. I really think that could help everybody. So thank you again, and I'll see you on the next one.